How to Save a Democracy with Sophie Murray. There is a lot of talk in our nation today about the stability and security of our democracy. Our democracy was birthed with the Declaration of the United States as an independent nation, with the Founding Fathers, and with the first president of our country, George Washington. The democratic state of our nation has since then been protected and passed down by the cooperation of the American people, the American government, and the respectable men and women running our nation. Since the birth of our nation, there has been questions and doubts of our system, but a new level of intensity has seemed to rise over the past decade, specifically during and following the 2016 presidential election. After reading How Democracy Dies, a novel by Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Siblat about the history of not only the American democracy and government, but democracies, successful and failed, around the globe, in order to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the governments and how to protect and save our democracy. I took time to find what I believe can be done to save our nation's democracy, as the novel proved to have been weakened over the past years. It's no secret that there is a strong political divide in our nation between political parties. There is much debate about the opinions and the ideals of politicians and whose are correct. However, for starters, there should be no debate of whether or not these knowledgeable and successful politicians are legitimate. Now, you don't have to agree with a politician to acknowledge that they at least have a deep understanding of our government, democracy, and how it works. That being said, a seemingly, but apparently not obvious tactic to save our democracy is to simply listen to these professionals. For example, if all living presidents are warning Americans not to vote for someone because he or she is clearly a demagogue, yes, I would suggest to listen to them and not vote he or she into office. If a law school graduate and doctors of political science are finding undemocratic ideals in a candidate, we should probably consider their findings before putting the candidate in charge of our democracy. After all, they are the experts. Failing to listen to those who know what they're talking about is an ignorant but feasible way to pose a threat to the security of our democracy. By simply listening to those who know the ins and outs, for lack of a better term, of the ideals of democracy and those who should be in charge of it, we can strengthen our chances of securing democracy in our nation. Aside from this solution, which depends primarily on the convincing and possibly changing people's ideals, there are some good, solid government fundamentals that can be improved to save democracy. One of which is a reevaluation and alteration of the checks and balances system in our nation. The system was developed in 1787 to be added to the U.S. Constitution to eliminate the risk of one branch of government gaining too much control over the other branches and the American nation as a whole. This has been, for the most part, successful, giving the legislative, executive, and judicial branches enough power to instill change and evolution in our country as they felt needed, but not enough power to make drastic decisions or changes without approval of the other branches, in hopes that if a proposition of change was detrimental to the state, the proposition would not see itself through all three branches, and therefore would not be permitted to change or affect the current state in a negative way. Somewhat related, there is a debate of whether or not the branches of government under the Trump administration, leaning heavily in favor of the GOP, which is the Grand Old Party, a reference to the Republican Party, enforce a strong enough separation of power and system of checks and balances. Americans, primarily but not exclusively, Democrats and independents, opposing the ideals of the GOP, fear the system of checks and balances has somewhat failed by allowing all three branches to be controlled by the Republican Party. For example, many Americans were unhappy with the appointment of the U.S. Supreme Court judge after the 2016 presidential election. At this time, Barack Obama, a Democrat, was the lame duck president of the United States, and Donald Trump, a Republican, was the winner of the 2016 United States presidential election, but was not yet inaugurated. Long story short, Obama wanted to nominate Merrick Garland, and Trump wanted to nominate Neil Gorsuch. This caused doubt in our nation, battling who deserved to nominate a new U.S. Supreme Court judge. As it played out, Trump was able to nominate Gorsuch. This, like many other political decisions, sparked questioning of the U.S. government and fear of one party gaining too much power. Although this scenario is not exactly a test of the checks and balances system, it posed questions of it. This being said, if the current system of checks and balances is redefined and strengthened, the doubt of the system and the risk of one party controlling the entire government and therefore ruling the American state is decreased, and democracy will remain stable. Now, perhaps a continuation of this solution would be refining the entire U.S. Constitution and protection against the fall of our democracy altogether. Some revisions of content, but more so the addition of more content, is needed, clearly stating what our society has seemed to accept as norms, but not demand that they exist. These norms are important because they pave the way for the behavior of a politician. The novel How Democracy Dies, specifically Chapter 9, discusses the idea of restoring basic norms in society and politics. This should include the etiquette of how politicians or candidates should behave and speak in terms of competitors, previous and current politicians, media, any political matter, and so on. Basically, anything that comes out of their mouth should follow the accepted norm. This can be enforced by including this etiquette in the Constitution. Another big issue that has been around but exaggerated during the 2016 election is the idea of the Electoral College. While it was created to protect the citizens' opinions and ensure their representation, the 2016 election posed this question. If the Electoral College is here to ensure equal and accurate representation, why does it not represent the popular vote of the country? This, of course, is in reference to Hillary Clinton winning the popular vote, but Donald Trump winning the electoral vote, deeming him the winner of the election. With an unclear system like this, many believe it is time for the work of the Electoral College to be evaluated and possibly revised. These brief examples I gave, along with many other concerns such as the power of large corporations and the money they hold when dealing with politics, are all ideas that can be added and revised in the Constitution, fortifying the U.S. democracy for the citizens and the government. To summarize, I believe the Constitution should evolve and grow, meaning revisions must be made with the changing times of our nation to ensure protection of the citizens and the government as a whole. The state of our government poses a question for all citizens in unique ways. The question is, what does the idea of the U.S. democracy mean to me, and what do I believe are the ways to secure it? I believe the points I made today are the steps we can take to secure it. I ask you now to evaluate the question for yourself, find your answers, and do what you can in your power to work toward them.